Right then guys, here I am for my all seasons of my team career mode video on F1 2021. This is the third time we've been graced with driver transfers and the second time in the Codemasters F1 game where we've been able to manage our own fictional team. One change from me is that I started recording this video much earlier in the game's life cycle than I did for the previous F1 games. You can tell that partly because the pecking order started like this. Mercedes had clearly the best car, Aston Martin the third best, and Haas started with a better car than Williams. Those aren't just the F1 2020 ratings repeated since there are some changes, but the performance patch which changed the starting performances to this didn't come out until about a fortnight after I'd finished recording all 10 seasons. With that in mind, it's no surprise that Mercedes won the inaugural Constructors' Championship. What's more surprising is that they secured it in Singapore. That means they won it with 6 races to spare. The fact they walked it was down to Red Bull constantly lagging behind with car development, and whilst they caught up towards the end, they never had a better car than Mercedes. The Drivers' Championship went to the final round and it was Lewis Hamilton who came out on top despite Bottas winning the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Verstappen in third was 156 points away from Hamilton, then you've got Ricciardo in fourth and then Perez in fifth, and he's 91 points back on his own teammate. Leclerc passed Norris for sixth in the championship in the final round as the Brit had an unrealistically bad season. Sainz scored about a third of the points of his Ferrari teammate. At Aston Martin, Vettel scored double the points of Stroll. Gasly was the last driver to get a double-figure points count and the only AlphaTauri driver to score any points, with Alonso and me the final drivers from any team to have any points at all. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes ended with nearly twice as many points as Red Bull. McLaren finished the first season in third and only 68 points behind Red Bull, and then there's Ferrari in fourth and Aston Martin in fifth. Just before the second season, Kimi Raikkonen bowed out of the sport, which is fitting given what we're seeing in real life. And that had multiple knock-on effects. Pierre Gasly was the one who stepped into Raikkonen's shoes at Alfa Romeo, which is smart by the team given Gasly's high rating and impressive performance last season. Giovinazzi also left Alfa Romeo, so they have a completely new lineup with Guan Yu Zhou in the other seat. Charles Leclerc of all people replaced Gasly at AlphaTauri, and why he left Ferrari I'll never know, especially since it was ex-Ferrari driver Sebastian Vettel who went to the Scuderia to plug that gap. Vettel at Ferrari is precedented, but George Russell at Aston Martin isn't, although it makes more sense than anything else that's happened so far in the career. Finally, Giovinazzi now finds himself at Williams, which is interesting given that both he and Latifi have the exact same overall rating. It wasn't that far into the second season that my team shot up the performance index to have the quickest car on the grid, and so it's no surprise that I took my first race win in the simulated Singapore Grand Prix. The big news from that race weekend though was Sebastian Vettel announcing his retirement from Formula 1. Because of increased competition from ourselves, Red Bull and McLaren, it wasn't until the American Grand Prix 4 races from the end of the year that Mercedes secured the second season's Constructors' Championship. Lewis Hamilton had to wait until the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to secure the driver's title, but he still won it, and by a bigger margin than he did in the first year despite retiring from 2 races, including the fabled Singapore Grand Prix. Verstappen and Ricciardo finished third and fourth in the standings for the second year running, but this time Lando Norris upped his game relative to his teammate to be only 34 points back. Thanks to 4 podium finishes and a win, all from simulated races, beat Sergio Perez, who didn't even get half the points of his own teammate. Carlos Sainz beat his new and outgoing teammate Sebastian Vettel, but in all fairness, I think Seb just had the edge over the whole season, because if you look at the full season's results, Vettel finished on the podium in Monaco and he retired one more time than Sainz did. Russell got over double the points of Stroll in the Aston Martin inter-team battle, and Schwartzman was able to collect 10 points with our rapidly improving car. Both AlphaTauri drivers ended the year with 2 points, but it's worth noting that Tsunoda got them in the crazy Austrian Grand Prix, whereas Leclerc got them from a conventional race. The very highly skilled Pierre Gasly scored a single point with Alfa Romeo, whereas his teammate Zhou didn't, and both Williams and Haas drivers didn't score any points either. But more shockingly, Ocon scored no points for the second season in a row, whilst Alonso got 78. The Constructors' Championship speaks for itself, with Mercedes crushing it, and then McLaren got second ahead of Red Bull, who were let down by Perez. Ferrari edged this out to secure 4th place, with Aston Martin pipping Alpine, and when I say Alpine I really just mean Alonso. AlphaTauri got 4 points, Alfa Romeo 1, and both Williams and Haas nada. Schwartzman's lackluster performance said to me that his time in F1 was up, and so I started going through the icon drivers which are new to F1 2021, starting with the 2008 runner-up, Felipe Massa. Other driver changes for this season include Perez replacing Vettel at Ferrari, and Christian Lundgaard replacing Mazepin at Haas, which is a step up on paper for the American team. You'll never guess what though. Christian Horner, Helmut Marko and the rest of Red Bull settled on Nikita Mazepin as their second driver in the apparent best possible replacement for Sergio Perez. That means both the best and worst drivers in Formula 1 are teammates. The third season was by far the closest yet, as at the end of the Brazilian Grand Prix with just 2 races to go, 9 drivers were still in championship contention. Hamilton was the leader, but Sainz was a mere 5 points back, and both McLarens were tied on 209 points and only 6 off the top. Massa, Verstappen, Bottas and Perez in descending order were also all in with a shout. Ultimately though, in both of the final rounds, Lewis Hamilton finished on the podium to become, if you include his real life titles as well, a 10-time Formula 1 World Champion. Lando Norris was only 10 points away from taking the Drivers' Championship for himself, as he beat his teammate Ricciardo for the first time in this career. Sainz and Perez tied on points in 4th and 5th respectively after the Spaniard had a shocking end to the season, scoring just 6 points in the final 2 races when he was still in title contention. Perez meanwhile won the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix due to a masterful one-stop strategy, and so both he and Bottas finished ahead of me in the drivers' table. Verstappen got the better of Massa, but even my teammate, who's 9th in the standings, was only 66 points away from Hamilton. That's how closely contested this season was. Alonso rounded out the top 10 after scoring more than triple the points of Mazepin, and then Leclerc and Ocon both got over double the points of the Russian. A shock 6th place for Tsunoda in Abu Dhabi gave him as many points as Mazepin, and he got preferential treatment in the championship on race position countback. So Mazepin was beaten by both Alpine and AlphaTauri drivers as he only scored 8 points, which is 188 less than his Red Bull teammate Verstappen. However, he did outscore the Aston Martin driver of Russell, who was the last to get any points at all. In the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull were let down by basically being a one-driver team, and so they ended the season in 5th. PSL Racing got 4th and were 83 points off the top, with Ferrari in 3rd and only 41 back. But the duo of Ricciardo and Norris just about secured McLaren the Constructors' Championship by a margin of 11 points. For Season 4, there was a 3 department-wide rule change concerning the aero, powertrain and durability areas of the car. That impacted the engines, with me hopping over to Renault since durability isn't particularly important but performance is, and they lead the way on that with 95. Mercedes are in the same ballpark at 90 performance, but then Ferrari have dropped to 80 and Honda have crashed all the way down to 77. Fernando Alonso bowed out of the sport for the final time at the end of last season, and what a final 3 seasons he had, given the cars he was lumbered with. The person brought in to try and fill his shoes is Charles Leclerc. However, Leclerc's departure from AlphaTauri significantly weakened them since they got in my former teammate Robert Schwartzman, who isn't really of the same caliber. Red Bull were obviously fed up with Mazepin, and rightly so, but he still ended up at Alpine as Leclerc's new teammate. My new partner is David Coulthard as I'm working my way up the ladder of icons, and the Scotsman is a marginal step forward on paper. The final change is predictable and sensible, and that's Ocon abandoning Alpine and running in the exact opposite direction to Mazepin as he's taken his place at Red Bull, but that does mean Ocon is in the cursed second Red Bull seat. Me and Coulthard found ourselves in a Brawn-esque situation since we had by far the best car after the rule changes, albeit with an advantage that decreased with each and every race. So we started the year with a win for Coulthard and a 1-2 for the team in Bahrain, with Lewis Hamilton as our closest challenger yet. He was over 30 seconds away from first place. What screwed DC over in the rest of the season was a characteristically amount of bad luck, as he had back-to-back retirements in the Netherlands and Italy. The Austrian Grand Prix is a whole special case, and I'll talk about that frankly incredible race in a separate video, but what could so easily have been a race win, or at the very least second place, turned into 10th. With Coulthard unable to win the driver's title, I took the championship myself to secure our first one for PSL Racing. Valtteri Bottas was the runner-up and only 20 points behind me, despite the fact he had an inferior car. Coulthard beat Hamilton in the point standings though, which means we've done the double this season and won the Constructors' Championship as well. McLaren were the clear third best team, with Norris the better of the two. Charles Leclerc finished 7th in the standings for Alpine with 143 points. His teammate Mazepin scored 4. Some other results I have to mention include Russell finishing 10th with a fairly mediocre Aston Martin car, and he beat his teammate Stroll, who's down in 13th. Verstappen finished in 11th with only 17 points to his name. Given how far Red Bull have fallen down in the pecking order off the back of the rule changes, which destroyed Honda's competitiveness, I think Verstappen has done really well, especially since his teammate and the now real-life race winner Esteban Ocon wasn't able to score a single point. The Constructors' Championship holds no real surprises given what we already know, but all I will say is that Alpine could well have beaten Ferrari. Across the season, Ferrari and Alpine kept swapping places in the car performance index, but I think Alpine had a marginally better car as an average. Knowing that, I think Leclerc did as well as anyone realistically could have done, and if Mazepin wasn't his teammate, then Alpine almost certainly would have beaten the Scuderia. Alpine clearly felt a similar way themselves, and 1 year after Red Bull got rid of Mazepin, Alpine dumped him too and brought Jack Aitken into the fold. That means Mazepin has fallen outside of F1 entirely and has joined the considerable number of F2 drivers in the free agents pool. The only other change for Season 5, apart from the 2016 World Champion Nico Rosberg getting his one-season return to Formula 1, is that the suppliers all recovered from last year's shock to the system, and they're now all on a similar level, with Mercedes holding the slight advantage. Honda's recovery helped get Red Bull back into contention, and by the time we arrived in Belgium after the summer break, they had the third best car again, behind only PSL Racing and Mercedes, who were back on top. Max Verstappen went from struggling to score points to winning half of the races in the season, including all of the final 5. That's how he won the Drivers' Championship, pipping Valtteri Bottas, who finished as the runner-up for the second year in a row. Hamilton ended the year in third, but fourth place was Charles Leclerc with a performance that I think even eclipses Verstappen's. Fourth place in the championship puts him ahead of Norris, Rosberg, Ricciardo, Sainz and so on, and let's be clear, Alpine never really had a car that was all that impressive on paper. Although, as a counterbalance, Jack Aitken in the second Alpine had a literally pointless season. Then again, 10 drivers total didn't get any points all year, and the most shocking was Esteban Ocon in a Red Bull. He had the third best car for at least half the year, and the same car Verstappen won the Drivers' Championship with. Mercedes had nearly double the points of the team in second, which is no surprise given that they were up against a one-man team, but Verstappen single-handedly beat McLaren. Also, Leclerc by himself nearly dragged Alpine ahead of Ferrari. He was only 7 points shy, and that would have been an even bigger achievement given that the performance index shows that there's no logical way Alpine should have been able to beat Ferrari. Season 6 was a straight continuation of Season 5, except that Sergio Perez has left the sport for good. That shuffled up the driver lineups a lot, with Lance Stroll leaving his dad's team for Alfa Romeo. Why or how that happened is unknown, but it defies all logic. Nobuharu Matsushita was his replacement. Ferrari now field an entirely new and entirely French lineup of Ocon and Gasly. Sainz swapped places with Ocon, which means he's partnering up with Verstappen at a Red Bull-owned team again. Although now they've both graduated up from what was Toro Rosso at the time to Red Bull. Giovinazzi still at Williams, but now with Dan Ticktum. Ironically, the one person who definitely won't be racing for Williams in real life next year. That means Latifi was dropped by the team and has now joined Mazepin in the scrap heap. Charles Leclerc for Alpine may have won the Italian Grand Prix, and my new teammate and 2009 world champion Jenson Button was victorious at Zandvoort, but there was one clear dominant force in Formula 1 this year. Max Verstappen won his second Drivers' Championship in Mexico, with 3 races still to run, and in the end his winning margin was 136 points, which is over 5 race wins worth of points. Hamilton pipped Bottas to second place, which is a departure from what we've seen recently, and then Gasly for Ferrari in 4th and Leclerc for Alpine in 5th were the 2 other standout performers this season. Second place in the final round of the year moved me up to 6th in the point standings and ahead of Jenson Button. Then it's both McLarens headed by Norris, with Carlos Sainz in the second Red Bull down in 10th. 87 points is just over a fifth of what his teammate Verstappen scored, but it's better than Ocon, who never scored any when he was in that second Red Bull seat, and Mazepin, who only got 8 points in his 1-year stint with the team. The only other thing to clear up is that almost all of the other point scorers scored their points in another ridiculous Austrian Grand Prix. I say ridiculous because 7 drivers retired, and even of those who finished, Lewis Hamilton was down in 14th, having pitted 4 times for reasons which were technically partially my fault. Anyway, Christian Lundgaard finished in 6th place, Esteban Ocon 7th, Dan Ticktum 9th, and Mick Schumacher 10th. Those results were their only ones in the points all year. Stroll, Matsushita and Schwartzman were able to fluke a finish in 10th in normal simulated races. So every single team was able to score points, but Lundgaard's amazing 6th place in Austria gave Haas 8th in the Constructors' Championship. My team went one better than last year and beat McLaren to 3rd, and Mercedes still outscored Red Bull despite Verstappen obliterating the Drivers' Championship, meaning the German Mark won their 4th Constructors' Championship in this career playthrough. Not surprisingly, there once again isn't exactly a huge correlation between the Constructors' Championship and the on-paper running order. The big news heading into the new year is that Nikita Mazepin is back. Yes, he's on his 4th different team, having driven for Haas, then Red Bull, then Alpine, and now Aston Martin. He's the new teammate for George Russell and the downgrade replacement for Matsushita. That means the Japanese driver is back on the free agents list along with Latifi. Since we finally had the best car on the grid and a multiple world champion in the form of Alain Prost behind the wheel, my team took our second ever Drivers' Championship. Prost was crowned the champion in Australia, so with a round left to go. Despite that, runner-up Bottas and Verstappen in third gave him a good run for his money. Yet again, Leclerc, Gasly and Russell all had a fantastic season, as they have done for the past few years. Carlos Sainz only scored 40 points, but in mitigation, he retired in all of the first 3 races. Proof, if ever we needed it, that the second Red Bull seat is a poison chalice. Schwartzman scored 14 points, but most of them were from a 4th place result in Brazil, and that 4th place result was gained off the back of a shock 2nd place result in qualifying. I think what happened there is one example, just one example, of one of the many qualifying quirks, or in other words glitches, that have been in the F1 games in one form or another for literally as long as I can remember. Ocon also scored 2 of his 5 points in Brazil, but that's still some 135 less than his Ferrari teammate Gasly. Mazepin though, in all fairness, scored all of his points in normal simulated races. Just a shame he only scored 3, whereas Russell got 101. Tsunoda and Stroll were the last drivers to score points this season, and they both did it under normal simulated circumstances. Neither Haas or Williams driver scored any points. Stroll's Alpha teammate Zhou didn't either, but also Jack Aitken didn't. That's the third, literally pointless season Aitken has had with Alpine, which given how well Leclerc has done in that car, that's unacceptable. I mean, even Mazepin did better when he was at Alpine, and that's not even a joke, that's a statistical fact. Leclerc single-handedly put Alpine further up the Constructors' Championship order than they should have been on paper, as they were 5th and 11 points ahead of Ferrari. That wasn't the only close battle, since Red Bull overtook McLaren in the final round to pit them to 3rd by 3 points, and myself and Prost only beat the mighty Mercedes by 26 points. 2 drivers simultaneously decided to hang up their helmets as Latifi announced his retirement during the Mexican Grand Prix, and then come the start of the 8th season, it turned out Daniel Ricciardo had also decided to go. Ricciardo I get, since his days of beating Norris are long gone, and age-wise it makes sense anyway. Age doesn't explain Latifi, but honestly, why even bother waiting in the wings when clearly no one wants you, despite probably being better than at least some of the guys who dubiously have a seat in F1 currently. Matsushita ended up at Alfa Romeo to create an all-Asian lineup there, and that's because Stroll left the Italian team to be Ricciardo's replacement at McLaren. The other change was Ayrton Senna joining my team, and given that Prost easily won the Drivers' Championship last year, even with some bad luck, you'd expect Senna to win this season quite convincingly, especially given that, apart from a late season surge from Red Bull, all the cars are exactly the same as they were in Season 7. Take a look at the season's race results, specifically Ayrton Senna's, and guess when I installed version 1.07. If you said just before the Austrian Grand Prix, then you'd be absolutely correct, since that update instantly eroded Senna's pace. Specifically, what that update did was fix a glitch that caused all the drivers to reset back to their base overalls, an issue which hit me in my game save at some point in Season 5, and that means there's a massive chunk of time when the drivers were at completely the wrong ratings for this point in the career mode, which obviously screwed over the younger drivers with lots of potential and attribute growth. That doesn't explain why Senna suddenly went from winning races to never finishing above 5th place. He had the best car, and even after the driver ratings issue had been addressed, he was still the 2nd best driver in Formula 1. Only Verstappen had a higher rating at a now whopping 98. But then below both of them there's Leclerc, who had risen to 94, Hamilton was still at 93, along with Norris and Gasly, with Sainz now at 92. And Russell had shot up to 91. Senna held on to the Drivers' Championship lead until the Belgian Grand Prix when Verstappen overtook him. But it was Lance Stroll from McLaren who took first place at Spa. With 2 rounds to go, it was Gasly who was leading the way, with Verstappen only trailing him by 3 points. And Bottas was still very much in contention, and he had momentum on his side as he won in Brazil. A lacklustre Australian Grand Prix for Gasly, with only 7th place in the race compared to 3rd for Verstappen, meant the Dutchman took the lead of the championship, which he held on to become a triple world champion. I kinda feel bad for Pierre Gasly, as he only lost out on the Drivers' Championship by 10 points. And if he'd won it in a Ferrari, only the 6th best car with the joint worst engine, that would have been arguably one of the greatest achievements by anyone ever seen on this channel. In a similar vein, it's absolutely worth mentioning that Aston Martin, and especially Alpine, do not have amazing cars, but that still didn't stop Leclerc finishing on the podium in Abu Dhabi, with George Russell winning the race. Now that flies in the face of logic, even with the massive shot in the arm their ratings rightly got with the version 1.07 update. Sainz improved from where he was in previous seasons, with 2nd in Abu Dhabi and 144 points total across the season, narrowly beating Russell, who is helped by his unlocked potential due to version 1.07. Then again, Mazepin scored 31 points, which isn't bad at all, and Stroll, who was the clear 2nd best driver at his new team, still had a respectable season with 132 points. Even Jack Aitken was able to up his game and finally score points after 4 years in F1, and that's because for ages he was stuck at his default rating of 66. And then suddenly he had 8 seasons worth of progression come in one big lump, and that shot him up to 83 overall, the same as Giovinazzi and Stroll, and 4 ahead of Tsunoda. That's how much damage was caused by the driver ratings glitch. Aitken had 3 wasted years in F1 being unfairly made to look totally incompetent. Schwartzman scored 8 points, all from Austria. Mick Schumacher scored 4 points, all from Austria, but Ocon also scored 4 points, and more deservedly, as he got them from 2 ninth places in simulated races. Neither Alfa Romeo and Williams drivers, along with Lundgaard and Tsunoda, scored any points. I could talk you through the Constructors' Championship, but honestly, is it worth it? It still has little resemblance to the on-paper car performances, and factoring in the drivers' ratings doesn't quite explain it either, although that's not even new for this season. Despite the changes made to the game by version 1.07, all we've done is trade one bizarre and barely logical reality for another bizarre and barely logical reality. A regulation change hit all 3 of the performance impacting departments, which had a huge effect on the engine hierarchy. Of everyone who could possibly retire, I would never have expected Mazepin to go, especially when Lewis Hamilton is still competing, and he would be, rather fittingly actually, 44 years old. I'm even surprised that Mazepin is able to leave on his own terms rather than being tossed aside like Latifi was. Starting at the top, the changes that retirement created included Russell also leaving Aston Martin as he went to Alpine to give the French team an all-British lineup. So Aston's replacements for Russell and Mazepin were Esteban Ocon and Dan Ticktum, who left Ferrari and Williams respectively. Leclerc went back to Ferrari in one of the more boring moves we've seen, and quite genuinely, one that arguably doesn't make a whole lot of sense given how well he's done during his many years at Alpine. Finally, Callum Ilott got his chance in F1 with a seat at Williams. That means if you include me as well, 7 of the 22 drivers on the grid are British. Michael Schumacher took over from Ayrton Senna in my team, and it started quite well, with 2nd place in the opening round at Bahrain and behind only Norris. Car troubles then cost him a shot at points in Spain, but then Schumacher won the Monaco Grand Prix. Then the inevitable happened. In only the 4th round of the year, his pace fell off the cliff, with only 8th place in Baku. What screwed Senna over in Season 8 also had an impact on Schumacher, and so I finally bought some extra personnel facility upgrades. Even with all that help, it was Lando Norris who had stolen the march on everyone, and with 2 rounds to go, he had a 17-point advantage over Schumacher, and he'd won exactly half of the races that had been run up to that point. Schumacher won the Australian Grand Prix though, with Norris in second and with the bonus fastest lap point. That 6-point swing in Schumacher's favour basically meant that, realistically, he would have to win the final round of the season and hope that Norris missed out on the podium.
Not bad for a number 2 driver.
The irony of that being said with Schumacher's name on screen is brilliant, but first place in of itself wasn't enough for him to win overall. However, Norris finished the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix down in 4th, behind race winner Schumacher, second placed Gasly and Bottas in 3rd. That means Michael Schumacher is now an 8-time Formula 1 world champion. It was a hard-fought championship win though, and Norris only missed out on his first world title by 3 points. All the other usual names are up at the front, with Bottas in 3rd but 64 points off the top. And then it's Leclerc in 4th as he convincingly beat the triple world champion of Verstappen and his new teammate Gasly, who was the runner-up in the championship last season. As far as I'm concerned, Charles Leclerc has been the best driver in this career mode, and by some margin. He's been consistently amazing and outperformed whatever car he's had. I think Verstappen and now Norris are the only other drivers who are even in the same league as Leclerc. Norris was obviously helped by Mercedes having by far the best engine, but then again, he still had a worse car than Bottas and Hamilton, yet he beat both of them, and he only narrowly lost to the great Michael Schumacher, who had an even better Mercedes-engined car. Robert Schwartzman snuck a points finish in the final race of the year, and no one else from the bottom 4 teams, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Williams and Haas, were able to all season. Michael Schumacher did well after the personnel facility upgrades came into effect, but that didn't help my bizarre lack of pace in simulated races, and that cost PSL Racing the Constructors' Championship win to McLaren. Ferrari and Mercedes were breathing down our necks come the end, but the Scuderia outscored Mercedes despite Mercedes having the clear power advantage over the other engine suppliers and a car that overall was only worse than mine and Schumacher's. For the final season, AlphaTauri replaced Schwartzman with Ilott from Williams, and so Williams brought in Louis Delatraz as his replacement. The obvious question is why not Schwartzman, since he's done so well for such a long time, and you could argue that it's largely down to luck, but to some extent you make your own luck, and certainly Schwartzman has never missed an opportunity to score points. Actually, the big question isn't why didn't Williams get Schwartzman, but why did AlphaTauri get rid of him in the first place? I think it's simply because he wasn't worth the money anymore. He'd raced in every season except for the 3rd one, initially starting out as my teammate. At the end of last year, AlphaTauri were paying him over $23 million. Even though he's out of F1, he still commands a salary in excess of $15 million because of his acclaim, which has naturally risen from 8 seasons in F1. Whereas Felipe Drugovich, who still hasn't been given a shot in F1, has an overall 3 higher than Schwartzman and a starting salary which is 1/3 of the price. The acclaim system isn't new and is just as flawed as it was in F1 2020, and so normally I wouldn't bother talking about it. I mean, it's clearly a backward system, but it's also so minor and easily ignorable that that's exactly what I did in F1 2020, ignore it. The thing is though, Lee Mather, the senior creative director for the F1 games, said in the run-up to F1 2021's release that the acclaim system has a huge impact on the driver transfers that happen, and so they added the ability to adjust the acclaim, resource point and money earning rates for both the player and AI. I doubted that claim immediately, since there was nothing I saw in F1 2020 that suggested that the acclaim system had anything to do with the driver transfers, but maybe F1 2021 was different, and so in the early days of when this game came out, I looked into this very issue and wrote an article for the race covering the experiment I did, in which I did 5 seasons in one career mode game save with everything set to reduced, one with everything on normal, and one where everything was increased. And I should also say this career mode, which you've seen in this video, has had all the settings on default. If you want to know the details about that experiment, then I'll leave a link to the race article in the description of this video, but long the short of it, there really weren't any differences between the 3 different career modes. In the all settings increased career save on F1 2021, Daniel Ricciardo did join Mercedes, but in fairness, that was only after Bottas retired from F1. Also, in the default career mode, in the 6th season, Mercedes had Guan Yu Zhou and Jack Aitken as their 2 drivers, which is one hell of a difference from what we've seen in this career mode, where in 10 seasons, Mercedes never changed. Again though, that was sparked by Bottas retiring, and then for some reason, Hamilton decided to leave Mercedes for Ferrari, despite the Italian team having a worse car than Mercedes both before and after he joined them. Certainly drivers do get harder to please as their acclaim level goes up, hence why in my F1 2020 career mode Mick Schumacher turned me down because our marketing department wasn't good enough, completely ignoring the fact that we were on the cusp of having a race and championship winning car. Also, I tried to sign Max Verstappen for season 10 of this career mode, but my team's acclaim rating wasn't actually high enough despite all the success we've had. That fussiness could explain why I've almost never seen Verstappen move teams. I say almost because I have actually personally seen him move once on F1 2020, and that was to Ferrari in a completely separate career playthrough to what I did for YouTube, but I've never personally seen him leave Red Bull in F1 2021. So going back to Lee Maver's claim that changing the acclaim earning rates affects the lunacy of the driver transfers, that simply doesn't seem to be true. And with all due respect, Maver also said that random car failures wouldn't be in the game because Codemasters don't want random to be a factor in their games, even though random car failures for the player are in the game and are new for F1 2021. Anyway, let's still assume that Maver's claim is true and that for some reason the AI teams are drawn to higher acclaimed drivers. If so, then why did AlphaTauri get rid of Schwartzman despite his high acclaim and decent results in seasons gone by? Also, why did Latifi keep getting ignored despite his high acclaim rating compared to the other free agents? Maybe that's because the teams do have some degree of standards and rationality. Well then, why did Red Bull, Alpine and Aston Martin all sign Mazepin when there were more talented, lower acclaim and therefore cheaper options out there? The problem with trying to establish a theory on how the driver transfers work in F1 2020 or 2021 is that there's too many contradictions, not enough transparency and no way to do a proper scientific experiment. It took the game 9 seasons, but even it started to realise just how blatantly flawed and badly designed the driver acclaim system is. I mean, once you know all this, you realise that some of the department events are stupid. I mean, why would you choose to raise your teammates' acclaim whilst also temporarily lowering their stats? More to the point, the higher a driver's acclaim, the more expensive they become. That's why AlphaTauri got rid of the overpriced Schwartzman, and then even ILOT got the chop halfway through the final season to cause the only mid-season driver change in this career game save. The only problem is that they replaced him with the even lower rated and more expensive Matsushita, whilst Drogovic finally got his break into F1 with Alfa Romeo. ILOT did go up from level 14 to 15 acclaim, and so maybe AlphaTauri no longer met his requirements, but if that's the case, then that means Callum ILOT shot himself in the foot and voluntarily ended his own Formula 1 career. I doubt AlphaTauri chose to get rid of him since his results weren't bad. I mean, the only thing is that Tsunoda scored 2 points in Austria, whereas Ilott hadn't got any up to that point in the season. But if Franz Tost fired him based on that, then he's an idiot. Point being, nothing about this entire situation makes any sense. Anyway, near static car development from everyone, which is unsurprising given that I'm ending the career with over 340,000 unusable resource points, as well as over $500 million in the bank, means Mercedes and PSL Racing went through the entirety of the 10th season with near identical cars and completely equal engines. Honda was some way behind the other engine suppliers, and that meant Verstappen and Sainz never had a hope of title contention. Hamilton had been unable to recover from the pre-version 1.07 days, and that meant he ended the career with a Focus rating of 25, whereas Bottas, probably off the back of repeatedly beating Hamilton since the Focus glitch was lifted, was at 89 Focus, which is firmly in the green zone. Senna was also highly focused and motivated given that he missed out on the driver's title 2 years ago, and he's at 100 overall all season thanks to the facility upgrades. However, Valtteri Bottas, after so many years of narrowly missing out, won the Drivers' Championship with 1 round in this season and this 200 race long career to go. Senna finished the Australian Grand Prix down in 6th despite how quick the car he has is, the maximum driver performance ratings, and the fact that he's the Ayrton Senna. Then again, a lot of the other race results are dubious to say the least given how quick the cars are, so Senna was by no means the only one who finished out of position. The Brazilian got his own back as he won the very last race of this career mode, albeit by a margin of 24 thousandths of a second over Bottas. In the end, Senna lost the Drivers' Championship to Bottas by 30 points, but the next nearest driver was Norris, and he was 98 points back. Here's what's interesting. Senna retired from 2 races and Bottas only 1. One of the races Senna retired from was the Austrian Grand Prix, and yet he went out, despite how destructive the Austrian Grand Prix usually are, he went out due to a mechanical failure rather than a crash. When Senna's car broke down, he was in 1st place and Bottas in 3rd. Bottas went on to pass Gasly and win, and so he scored 25 points, while Senna got none. You see where I'm going. If Senna's car didn't break down in Austria, then both Senna and Bottas would have had 1 DNF this season. If Senna won in Austria, then he would have had an extra 25 points to his name, and Bottas would have had 7 less. That's a 32 point swing, and Senna only lost the championship by 30. That's how unlucky Senna was to lose the Drivers' Championship, but that's F1 and it's a cruel sport, as Senna himself knew. Anyway, that's the end of the career, and if you want to know what happens at the end, well, after you press advance at the end of the final race, you get the usual acclaim and cash screens before being booted back to the main menu. So it's just as unceremonious as it has been for the past few F1 games. I'll leave the final season's drivers and constructors tables on screen so you can make your own judgments, but also so you can see how much F1 has changed over the past decade. That said, there's many ways in which it didn't. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this comprehensive look at the My Team career mode in F1 2021, and if you did, be sure to leave a like, comment down below, and I'll see you guys hopefully in the not too distant future for a few more videos on F1 2021, including a look back at the Austrian Grand Prix I took part in over the course of this career mode. So I'll see you guys then.